Andrew's perspective. I must have spent hours in my cell's bathtub that night, desperately scrubbing my hands raw in an ultimately fruitless attempt to remove the odious sensation of death slicking them. It was true that in the eyes of my compatriots that Providence spy deserved it. Hell, seeing those videos on what they did to civilians, perhaps I thought so too. But there's a fine line between believing someone needs to die and doing it yourself. Regardless, no amount of physical cleansing would be able to assuage the newfound sense of guilt welling up inside. Stepping out of the bath and robotically beginning to dry myself off, I approached the mirror beside the sink and pondered the face therein. The face of a killer. "You're pitiful!" I growled to the man in the mirror, narrowly managing to hold back tears. "The people of Zintral need you, yet here you are crying for their enemy." After another hour of staring at myself, the contrition and remorse formerly at the emotional forefront ceased to carve any longer at my heart and were instead replaced with a deep, defensive apathy. Sluggishly dragging myself into the living room and plopping down into the nest-like couch bed, I absent-mindedly flicked on the television and heard without listening the programs thereupon. However, in the midst of my wayward search for distraction, something on their History Channel caught my eye. Mythology of the Tamanian Providence, an overview. Seeing this, curiosity desperately struggled up from the depths of my mind and displaced beneath it the waves of guilt, leaving them little more than vague undercurrents in a sea of scientific spirit. Weakly tossing aside the remote and laying down my head upon the comfortable sheets, I began watching the program from where it had turned on, with a theologian explaining their mythology. Legends of the Tamanian people claim that long ago, sometime during our early Stone Age, a great egg laid by an elder god descended from the stars onto this world. The tribes of Arquisa gathered around in wonder as from this egg hatched the three Tamanian gods, enlightened, benevolent beings of great knowledge. These gods looked upon the wretched early Kafel with pity, and so resolved to aid them. The gods unified the tribes into one and began their teaching. Hearthsage brought into their homes the miracle of flame and taught the Kafel how to harness it for themselves. Soul Healer showed them the power to be found in medicinal herbs, and Elder Scribe instructed them on how to create the written word. A golden era of primeval prosperity began. However, such a peace would not last long. Gods are eternal beings, ever dying and ever reborn. And so, as the gods prepared to return into their egg, its shell repaired through the ritual sacrifice of various metals, and once again return themselves unto the void beyond. They gave a set of commandments to their people in order to maintain the Kafel utopia. When the gods finally left, however, many of the unified Kafel people rejected their sacred word. As the tribes split off and disseminated across the lands, even defying their god's order not to war amongst themselves, only one remained truly loyal to what their gods had commanded unto them. These people would come to be known as the Tamanian. Whereas the other tribes of Kafel were cursed for their disobedience with physical marks of perversion, the Tamanian people were spared such indignation. Their form remained perfect, as their gods intended. It is said that only when the gods' chosen people are all whom remain will they finally return once more unto Arquisa, to guide them on the path of godhood. Hearing this explanation of Providence's beliefs, my eyes widened with sudden understanding. They're trying to kill everyone else, so their fucking gods come back? Not only was the concept thoroughly ridiculous by my standards, it was also easily the most dangerous cult belief I'd ever heard of, making human cults like Heaven's Gate look downright harmless by comparison. What happens if they win and no gods present themselves? Will they just keep killing each other? Fortunately, my frustration with this madness was just enough to override for the moment that sense of guilt festering within, replacing it with a feeling I could only describe as righteous indignation. Hearing the full explanation for Providence's senseless slaughter of men, women, and children made my blood boil and reminded me of what my friends were fighting for. The rest of the documentary was mostly unsurprising, detailing Providence's isolationist history and ritualistic practices. About midway through a segment on their holidays, I was interrupted by my door being shoved open. Turning around, I discovered Vavi, Chot, and Holvan approaching me with looks of utter amazement painted across their faces. "I can't believe it," the biologist muttered, approaching me without hesitation and awkwardly running a claw across my forehead as I sat frozen by virtue of sheer bafflement. "I can't believe it either," I began sarcastically, pondering internally what the hell they were so fascinated by. "Care to explain what exactly it is we're not believing?" "Oh, right, sorry," Holvan recoiled, quickly recomposing his more professional persona before finally providing me half an explanation. I was called in after Vavi to see the video of you defending yourself against Yisk, and I wanted to run a few tests, if you would oblige." "Go on ahead," I shrugged, leaning back into the bed in careless preparation for whatever probing nonsense they were about to subject me to. By this point, I trusted the birds not to harm me in any serious fashion. At worst, they'd probably be taking some blood samples or some dumb shit of a similar caliber. "Actually," Chot piped up, grabbing my hand and with significant effort lifting me back into a seated position. "Holvan wanted to take some x-rays of your injury. For that, we need to go to the base's clinic." Frankly, somewhat unsure about what sort of injury they were referring to, I nevertheless brought myself compliantly to my feet and began the unusually arduous journey through the base, flanked on 3 sides by my trio of handlers. We were stopped a handful of times throughout our trip, first by guards establishing a new security checkpoint, then, on at least 3 occasions, by scientists applauding the slaughter of that unfortunate spy. "That rotten fool won't be home for dinner," one of them quipped wittily, returning to my mind the grim notion that I had mere hours ago ended a life. That remark, however, was not the only uncouth reminder passed along to me throughout our long walk. Indeed, it seemed that everyone at the base was all too happy to contribute. I didn't blame them per se for making light of the situation, but regardless, their remarks only served to bolster my feelings of guilt. At last, after what felt like hours of stumbling through the featureless, complex halls, Holvan stepped ahead of us toward a pair of double doors and held one of them open for me. Inside was something distinctly reminiscent of a doctor's office back on Earth. A receptionist at the front desk greeted us with an awestruck expression as Holvan approached her and clarified our purpose. "Miss Nimvi," he chirped politely, looking upon the receptionist with an expression I recognized as flirtatious. "Could you perhaps page in Dr. Helk for us? Our friend here requires an X-ray and maybe just a few other tests." Returning with relish the biologist's gesture, Nimvi leaned down over a buzzer and robotically called for Dr. Helk to come greet us. Following this, she continued to speak with Holvan, though all the while stealing curious glances at me. "We are still on for dinner tonight, aren't we?" "There's one cafeteria on this level and our eating schedules are the same, so I don't see how I could possibly stand you up," the biologist replied jokingly, concluding his sentiment just as from the doors behind Nimvi and to the left emerged a kafel I could best describe as balding, with a head noticeably less feathered than the others, and the feathers on his arms seemingly having disappeared entirely. "Ah, it's the alien," he commented, iterating the obvious for us given that I was literally standing there. "Allow me to welcome you to our clinic. I saw the results of that scuffle you got into with Yisk. Were you injured?" "No," I growled softly, growing exceptionally weary of people bringing that up. "Just here for some x-rays, that's all." Clearly misunderstanding my foul mood, the doctor continued speaking as he guided us down another hallway and into the analysis room where he kept the x-ray machine. "There's no shame in needing a trip to the doctor after that fight," he warbled happily, earning from me nothing more than a defeated sigh of acceptance before continuing. "After all, you did send the other guy to our morgue, so I'd argue you came out on top." "Regarding that fight," interjected Chot, waving me over to a metal table where presumably the photos were to be taken, "Andrew sustained a shot to the forehead from a Rakasi model. We need an X-ray of that to see what form of damage it's caused." At that, the doctor, he began to laugh. "How foolish do you think me?" He squawked raucously between chitters. "I was a field medic, you know. I know what a Rakasi round to the head looks like, and it most certainly doesn't look alive." "That," Holvan continued, "is why we need the X-rays." Following this statement, the doctor's mirth quickly decayed into an expression wide-eyed terror. "You're not joking," Why would we be joking about this? Vavi chirped melodically, seating herself by my side as I laid down upon the examination table. Rakasas are some of the most deadly infantry weapons ever devised by Zintril, and you're telling me he just shrugged one off? Yes, affirmed Chot, looking every bit as curious as Holven to see a close-up of what injury that bullet had created. We wish to get an X-ray so we may know the extent of that bullet's damages. Understood, the doctor concluded with a light nod, approaching an utterly massive terminal right across from the table where I laid. Let me just type in some parameters and— Wait, I interrupted, a sudden realization screaming out from the depths of my mind. Aren't you guys supposed to leave the room for this? Why ever would we do that? Chot began, shrugging off my advice without a second pondering. Pretty sure it's dangerous for you to just— This is a perfectly safe procedure, I assure you. The doctor spoke to me in a soothing tone, exacerbating my frustration with his patronizing tone. Do you not have X-rays back on Earth? Wait! Vavi interjected, repeating my one-word line from moments ago and looking to me with a genuine concern, which reminded me of why we were such good friends at this point. Could you explain why this is dangerous? High-energy wavelengths can damage your DNA from overexposure, I revealed, prompting a look of confusion from the doctor as I continued. One X-ray is perfectly safe for me, but for a doctor like you, this kind of daily exposure could cause cancer. Did you guys not know that? No, the doctor began, utterly dumbfounded by my revelation. These are a relatively new technology. Long-term side effects haven't been studied yet. Holven appeared equally shocked regarding this new information, now looking at me with a fascination I was becoming increasingly used to. I'm going to bring this up the ladder and have the information shared for the biomedical community conference, he commented, producing a notepad and quickly jotting down verbatim what I had said. You may have just saved lives. Regardless, the doctor continued, finally beginning to type in the X-ray parameters on the gargantuan computer, no more powerful than my 9th grade calculator. I don't do these very often, so I should be fine. Perhaps the rest of you could step out until it completes. Offering to Dr. Helk a collective nod of agreement, my trio of attendants awkwardly shuffled out of the room as the machine just above me whirred to life. Half an hour later, the results were in. Amazing, the doctor breathed, holding the image of my bones within his claws and running one of them over the image of my skull. Microfractures? A bullet to the head caused microfractures. Not to mention, Holven picked up, tapping at the photograph from behind Helk. His bones are dense. They're not hollow like ours. A handful of subsequent tests served only to affirm the hypothesis that they had already formed. As it turned out, Earth's higher gravity had resulted in species built like living tanks in comparison to those of Arkisa. My lifting capacity was over quadruple that of the average Kafel, and apparently human bones were tied with the carapace of a Wemak, a species of tiny armored fish, for the toughest organic material ever recorded. Around the clinic, the atmosphere was one of not just fear, but fascination as well. Following our visit, Holven stayed behind to further analyze the findings of my checkup, as Vavi, Chot, and myself began headed back to the cell from which I had come. However, no sooner than we were to pass the hangar bay that a realization came to me. You guys mind if we stop by my ship? I think my prototype is just about done, and I'd like to present it to the lab tomorrow.